Hello, hello, and welcome back to Mr. and Mrs. Social Studies. My name is Sarah, and today we have video number 2 in our epic Back to School New Teacher series here on our YouTube channel. Again, if you are a new teacher or maybe changing schools or grade levels, definitely be sure to subscribe. We'll have so much helpful content over the next 2 months to help you with back to school. Today, we are talking about that process of sizing up your classroom, your curriculum, your schedule, and some other basic components of the start of the year so you can develop a really effective plan for yourself when the time comes to do so and prep. So with this in mind, we're going to go through a few key questions to reflect about and ask yourself when you're actually in your classroom, when you're looking at your schedule, when you're looking at your supplies, when you're looking at your curriculum, your textbook, anything like that, because it can feel completely overwhelming when you get started and it's just so much new stuff all at once. And how do you know what to focus on and make sense of? That's what this video here is going to be helping with. First, let's get into your classroom and supplies. First up, when you are actually in the space, how is your classroom arranged? What is the layout? Where is the tech located? Where is your desk located? Where are the windows located? Where are your key storage areas going to be? We want to get a good sense of this and start to sort of piece together a shell of the room. This is also an important time to think about student desks and the general layout for your classroom, what you want it to be. Now, some of this may depend on how many students you have, as well as the size of your classroom, as well as are you sharing a classroom with other teachers, or is this your own space? Obviously, you won't want to be doing anything too wild or too involved that requires too many changes if you are going to be sharing that classroom space. And in that case, you want to work with what you've got. Every district is going to have their own policies regarding seating and layout for your classroom, but you can follow those general principles. You can even think about, what direction do I want my teacher desk to face? Do I want to face so I can see the door? Do I want to face it so the sun is not going to be in my eyes, streaming in from the window? Are the desks arranged in a way that will make sense if I'm using my projector, so kids aren't going to have to crane their necks and turn around to be able to see the board? It's really helpful to be thinking through these different pieces before the year actually starts, so you can make as many adjustments as needed before students arrive and you already are starting to get settled in a routine. It's also important to pay attention to how much wall space you have for decoration purposes, as well as any bulletin boards you have. If you've got some bulletin boards, it may help to get some of those measurements down so you can start thinking about what you're going to be including on them, and at least with the bulletin board getting bare bones set up. There's certainly no need to have decorations covering all the wall space, but for the bulletin boards, you kind of need to have something on them. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but just start paying attention to those. You also might pay attention to see if you've got a whiteboard or a chalkboard or any other unique space along your walls that may affect how you use the space. I know personally in my most recent classroom, there's a classroom tour video link below, there were a couple key areas in my classroom. I had a lot of whiteboard space along one wall. I had 2 bulletin boards that were kind of next to each other to make a much larger bulletin board. I also had a bunch of shelving and cabinets on one wall that were great for putting classroom decor on, as well as a wall that was mostly windows with some shelving below it. And using that in mind, I thought about what were the key components that I wanted to include in terms of decorations and just classroom setup, and how could I divide that up. I prioritized first with the bulletin board setup, and then I focused on just general guidance and forms and organization in different spots. I set up an agenda spot on my wall and kind of just worked with my space to determine what the best outcome was. And so you can do the same thing. Take note of these different styles of space, and then you'll work through them one at a time to figure out the best approach. It's also important to scout out where your classroom location is in relation to other important sites. It's very likely you'll have to go to the office every day. Maybe you have to sign in or get your mail from your mailbox. You'll want to know the closest staff bathroom location, or maybe the closest to in case someone's cleaning one or someone else is in one when you need to go. You'll also want to scope out the teacher's lounge or any other related spaces or planning areas that you might have, as well as any other important rooms that you might need to visit at least sometimes. It's also important to pay attention to the entrance that makes the most sense for you to use, as well as parking areas. Especially in larger schools, there's likely multiple parking lots and multiple entrances, so you want to figure out the one that is going to make the most sense for you. It's also important to take a look at your supplies. What supplies were left by past teachers? What supplies do you already have personally? And what supplies are you going to actually need? With that, different classroom situations are going to vary. If you do have a lot of supplies in the classroom, almost too many, it could be very helpful to reflect about what's actually necessary. One thing that we have both found to be true here with Mr. and Mrs. Social Studies is that when items are left behind in a classroom and teachers kind of pass on things to other teachers, a lot of the old resources are not necessarily still useful or relevant anymore, and they might just be wasting space. Maybe the technology used is obsolete. I had a lot of overhead projector resources and transparencies that I just threw away when I was cleaning out my classroom because there was no need to ever go back to that, and they were just a waste of space in the classroom when especially some storage areas might be already kind of tight. Likewise, some materials in themselves are just not as good. I can't tell you how many old classroom materials that we've actually just recycled because we were horrified by some of the lessons that were in that book, either just very insensitive and offensive, or they just weren't good teaching, and maybe just a busy worksheet that had no real added value, or just a coloring page. So it's important to be mindful of the kind of stuff. Just because it's an official printed material from maybe a reputable source or online teacher catalog does not mean it's actually valuable. If there's anything harmful, just recycle that so no other teacher ever uses that and causes harm in their classroom with those materials. It's also important to know, especially if you're starting out, just because you have the space doesn't mean you have to fill it. And you don't have to have all the supplies if you don't think you're really going to need them. Keep it simple. Reflect about your teaching style and what types of activities you're going to want your students to do, and align those activities that you plan to do with the materials that they will need, and don't worry about all the extra stuff. You don't have to have all these extra coloring supplies if you don't plan on doing a lot of more so crafty stuff or interactive notebooks or things like that. It's also very important before you go out and spend your own money on supplies, you talk to other staff or even your admin about what sort of offerings they have. Maybe there is a small stipend that schools provide to help you cover the cost of some of those supplies. For me, it was $50, which of course is not much in the scheme of setting up your classroom, but it helps. And I use that to help cover some of the costs associated with getting my classroom set up. As well as there might be a supply cabinet or area of the school where they order larger amounts of supplies. And so, for instance, I could request from the secretaries if I need more Post-it notes, they would get me those, or if I needed more Expo markers. So see what options exist before you make a mistake and spend more of your own money. Lastly, I'll pull in a plug for Dollar Tree. If you've got a Dollar Tree by you or dollar store, I know I got several bins and organizers there when I was starting out. That did help keep costs down, especially if you're beginning. But don't go overboard, just get a few basic things to start, and you can always keep improving things later. Next, let's look at your district's curriculum and textbooks. First, does your district have a specific curriculum? And if so, how to access it? This might seem like an obvious question, but not all districts do. And if they don't have one, that's something you need to know right away because it shapes the actions you need to take as you prepare, and you don't necessarily have, a guidebook to help you. It's also possible that the district curriculum is very limited. For example, again, my most recent school, it was a one-page Google Doc that had just an overview and very general pacing guide of each trimester. And that obviously leaves a lot of flexibility from the teacher perspective. But however much information is provided, it's something you want to know right away so you can start putting together that yearly plan, which we have another video about that coming up within the next few weeks. So again, stay tuned for that. It's also important to see what sort of textbook you'll be using if there is a textbook provided, as well as what does the textbook include? Is it just the textbook itself? Is there an online textbook? Are there any additional materials that come with it, such as pre-made tests or extra activities that you can use? Not all textbooks are created equal, but there are often a lot of great resources that are included in the supplemental materials that may be helpful. I know for Mr. Social Studies, my husband Jake, he found some really helpful lesson summaries that accompanied every lesson in a previous textbook he had, and those were a very helpful tool for different sections when he wanted a no prep worksheet that he could use to pair with whatever topic the students were learning about. And it had simplified things a bit more to be able to use those. So again, it helps to just take a look and right from the start know how much you're working with, because then you know how much you're going to have to supplement later on. It's also important to learn about your school's grading policy. It is not always easy to do, but if you can kind of go into the school year having some sort of mindset about grading or an understanding of how your district wants you to grade. Is there a certain number of assignments you need to grade per week? Is there a specific, framework for grading? Do they do standards-based grading? Are there weighted grades for formative or summative assessments? Is it kind of a free-for-all? You assign the points and it works however you want. Having a little bit of this planned out ahead of time will make it easier, especially when it comes time to grading your first assignments. When in doubt, I always recommend that people keep it simple, because it might sound like a good idea to do this complicated weighted grade system at the start of the year, but if you've never taught before, you'll realize within a few weeks what your preferred style is, and I don't want you to lock yourself into something that's difficult to maintain. Lastly, let's talk about your schedule. What is your daily teaching schedule? How many preps are you teaching? How many different classes of each prep? How long are passing periods? When do you think you'll be able to squeeze in a bathroom break? It might seem silly, but it is helpful to plan these ahead. When is your lunch? How long do you have for lunch? When's your planning period? How long is your planning period? Are there meetings that you have to do on a regular basis or attend? When will students first arrive in your classroom? When are students dismissed? There's so many different factors here when it comes to your new schedule, and it's helpful to really reflect about these and get organized. I know for myself, obviously there's probably some sort of an official bell schedule given out to your school, but I know for myself it was helpful to actually create my own version of that only had the times that were important to me, so I knew exactly what to do. And also I posted that in my classroom, at least times that were specific to my students, so that it was easy for both me and them to know when each class ends, to make sure I'm properly pacing and not letting a lesson run too long to the point that we're scrambling at the end, on a regular basis. Of course it happens sometimes, but the goal is to not have it happen too regularly. So take a closer look at your schedule and get comfortable with that, and that will definitely help you have a smoother transition when the school year starts. In the comments below, let me know any questions you have about any of these topics we have addressed, and stay tuned for the following weeks. We have so much good content coming your way here at Mr. and Mrs. Social Studies, and I hope you'll be along for the ride. Feel free to subscribe to the channel up here and check out some of our past videos over here. We'll see you next time. Bye.